Mr. Roberts, my question is very similar to the first one, but I think it really should be emphasized. What do we do with all of the illegal immigrants, and what should the immigration legislation be comprised of?
Well, let me be clear. The families in this book are all legal. You know, this is not a book of policy about illegal immigration, but it's a fair question. I think that there should be a path to legal immigration for people who pay taxes, pay fines, have not run afoul of the law. I know a lot of illegal families who are, you know, very loyal Americans, very loyal taxpayers, contribute a lot to the economy. I think we should find a way eventually to keep them. Let's remember, for all of the, you know, the conservative outcry, who was one of the prime supporters and the man who signed the last bill to create a, quote, amnesty or a path to citizenship for, it was Ronald Reagan. It was Ronald Reagan who did it. So the notion that somehow it's conservative orthodoxy that to keep immigrants out just doesn't read history correctly. So I do think there should be a mechanism. I think it shouldn't be easy. I think it should require significant proof of their contributions to the economy, of their willingness and history of abiding by the laws. Absolutely. But let's be realistic. We're not going to throw them out. They're not going to go home. And are we better off having them inside American society or outside? From our own point of view, we're better off having them inside. And a lot of the anti-immigrant feeling stems from a certain idea, and it comes up again and again and again in American history. Whether it's the the know-nothings in the 1840s who wanted to kick out all the Irish and the Germans, or the 1940s about the Japanese. And this is the underlying theory of every spasm of anti-immigration feeling in the whole history of this country over 200 years. And that is, okay, now America is perfect. We're finished, and we're going to pull up the drawbridge because the next ones are going to somehow, and the word you see, I've seen this word quoted over 200 years, the next generation of immigrants is going to corrupt our character. Corrupt our character, degrade the notion of what it is to be an American. In my humble view, that turn of mind, which has shown up again and again and again in American history, totally, profoundly misreads the nature of American history and American culture. Because our great genius is we're never finished. We're never perfect. We always need to be renewed by the next wave of immigration. And this is not a supposition. This has been true for 200 years. We've got a lot of data points on this. But you see it again and again and again. The pull up the drawbridge impulse. Keep the Germans out. Keep the Irish out. Keep the Italians out. Keep the Jews out. Keep the Japanese out. Now it's keep the Hispanics and the Muslims out. There's nothing new about this. They were wrong 200 years ago when they said this. They were wrong 100 years ago when they said it. And they're wrong today.
Mr. Roberts, for over 5 years, a group of globally minded people have been addressing the challenge of how to help Cleveland regain its role as being immigrant international friendly. That role, that challenge and the efforts have intensified this last year with the leadership of the Jewish Community Federation. When we have an international welcome center in Cleveland, what would be the one or two really critical things that the International Welcome Center must do?
Well, this is a very good question, and I admire and I know of your work, and I admire and applaud it. In fact, I read about it long before I came here because in researching Assis's history and the role of immigrants in the Cleveland economy, I think one of the, apart from, of course, selling my book, I think that these stories are real, and these stories are compelling, and these stories put the lie to the notion that it's a net loss or we degrade the culture. I think that's part of it. I think the facts are there. I think the economic studies are there. I think that and I would not just appeal to people's sort of romantic notion of, remember your own grandmother who came from Italy, or, get misty-eyed at the Statue of Liberty. That would be nice. But what really, I think, makes the difference is facts. What makes the difference is self-interest. It's in the self-interest of this community to welcome immigrants. Everybody in this room is better off if you have immigrants creating jobs and creating economic activity and creating opportunities for your kids in the next generation. We have some students here that Mike Goldberg, my friend, has brought. Where are their jobs going to come from? They're going to come from this entrepreneurship, this energy, this spirit. So it's not just a question of ideology or generosity, which are important. It's self-interest. And that's, I think, the most powerful case, because the studies are clear, the examples are clear, and that's what I think you can do. And you know, it's a lot easier when you're arguing in favor of people's self-interest than against it. It tends to be a truth of American politics.
Thanks for the excellent speech. My question has to do with that basic premise that we must keep people out. Why must we keep people out and do it politically? It's not like if we allowed open immigration that everyone in the world would come here. Supply and demand can work that out. Why must it be a political answer to who comes in, who comes out, and who gets to decide that, in your view?
Well, look, as I said, I understand that unlimited immigration, and including illegal immigration, has costs as well as benefits. This gentleman's question raised it. There are places in this country where illegal immigration overwhelms the school systems and overwhelms the hospitals. It would be naive and foolish, even for the most ardent supporters of immigration reform, to pretend that that's not true. It is true. And it's also true that I think that a totally open border would not necessarily be a good idea, because it could overwhelm the system. But I think that we can be much smarter about how we do this. I mentioned one example of trying to reward people who are much more potential entrepreneurs. It's also true that there's, my gentleman over here is the incoming president of the American Immigration Lawyers, Mr. Leopold. He knows this much better than I do. But there are many provisions in the law which can be reformed. For instance, it's still not all that easy for people who want to invest capital here. There are provisions in the law to allow people, but they can be made a lot more flexible and a lot more open. Actually, I'm a big proponent of family reunification. I know there are some people who disagree with that, because a lot of the provisions in the law give preference to families to bring over relatives. I'm actually in favor of this idea up to a point, because I think that immigrants do better in connected communities. I think that, you know, there is a downside to immigration. I mentioned it. It can be a very lonely, difficult, dispiriting experience to come to a new country and be separated from your family and separated from your home. I mean, these are not all good news stories. There are families in this book who don't make it in America. And you know that as well as I do. It's not everyone is a success story. But I think people have a better chance of making it if they're connected to a community and connected to their families, both psychologically and also economically. How do most people... Assis, you know, is a great entrepreneur and was able to convince the banks here to lend him money. But a lot of immigrants, how do they get started? They borrow money from their families, you know, or their communities, the Asian communities, the Koreans. A lot of Asian communities have these wonderful traditions of giving circles where, you know, 12 families will contribute money, and every year one family gets to take money out of the pot and start a small business. You can't do that if your families aren't here and if these communities are not cohesive. So I think we're much better off. I like family reunification as an idea. Part of the problem has been that even today,